in London. I'm the creator and host of Backstory Podcast, and please have a listen wherever you listen to podcasts. And with me to discuss headlines and behind the headlines across Europe and beyond is Jo Phillips. Hi, Jo.
Hi, Dana.
Jo is a commentator in news. She's very famous here. She's on the BBC. She's on many programs. Never hesitant to share her opinion. She is joining us from Kent right now, known for its sea and sand and feisty commentators.
Feisty commentators. And it's also the place where we get completely cut off when all the lorries stack up, when they're waiting to get through across the channel. I'm about 20 miles from the Channel 4.
So this is where the lorries, you mean the big trucks, right? Because we have a lot of Americans here. So the big trucks will come. Most people don't know that every day you have this, and we'll talk about it more in Brexit, I think, but when we talk about that, but every day you have this incredible transfer of goods between the United Kingdom and Europe. A lot of it's done by truck that crosses the English Channel, and there's some question as to what's going to happen to that, right? When England, the UK, leaves the European Union at the end of this year.
Yes, and not very long to go. I mean, it's a matter of weeks, and everybody is predicting utter chaos. I mean, not least because of the transfer of goods and freight and trucks and people. But we don't know what the arrangements are going to be. They've already, around here where I live, they've already taken over plots of land which they will use to park the trucks, the lorries, whilst they're waiting for the new customs checks and things. But we're all walking into this with not very much plan, and I think people are beginning to get quite frightened about what's going to happen when we come out of the EU properly at the end of the year.
Let's start with COVID-19 in France. Because one kind of rolls into the other. But I was there last week, and I went there a number of weeks ago. And early on, where are we? We're almost at the end of August, mid-August. But after the spring lockdowns in June, France had about maybe 1,000 cases of COVID-19 per day. And then it started progressing to 1,500 and 2,000. As of today, the French government reporting 5,429 new cases. These are not deaths, but these are people with COVID-19 that they're finding in testing facilities. 5,429 cases a day, and concerns that they are heading for some national lockdown again. And that is a trend in Europe.
Yeah, and I saw that according to the French government, that the R rate, which is the rate of infection, which is the guiding principle for whether we bring in a new lockdown, when anybody brings in a new lockdown, it is 1.4, and the magic number is below 1, so that's really quite high. And this is Paris, so obviously a busy European city, people going back to work, but it is August, and August traditionally in Paris is empty of Parisians, but it is very worrying, and I think it is beginning to be seen across Europe that the figures of infection are rising, even though the death rate is not anywhere near as catastrophic as it was a few months ago. It's this infection rate that's really beginning to worry people, and as we go into the autumn, and it's a lot harder for people to stay outside and to open all their windows and to be exposed to fresh air, which seems to have some beneficial effect.
Okay, let's talk about the air. And by the way, the very cool thing about this HAPS broadcast is that people can interact, they can ask questions, and they can say hello. And Ariel Hickson, who I know very well from Quick Hits News, which we do together, just said hello from Brooklyn. So masks and mixed messages. France and Germany are saying masks are necessary. You mentioned Paris. I mean, when I was there, also Nice, Marseille, you definitely cannot enter a store without a mask. And on the street, everybody in Nice was wearing masks. And here in England, where I live and my kids go to school, confusion. And Jo, maybe you want to take a run at that, because originally the government said as kids were going back to school, they would not need masks. And then Scotland gave In the United Kingdom, divided kingdom, Scotland gave a very different message, and now England has changed its tune this week.
And not for the first time. The government doesn't seem to know what it wants. First of all, they said no masks were necessary in school. The kids go back to school in the majority of English schools end of next week. It's still fairly unclear about how it's going to manage. First of all, the government said no masks are necessary. Then they decided that masks were necessary, but not in the classroom. You're supposed to be wearing masks on public transport, but not necessarily in the street. So let's take a typical kid going to school on the train or the bus. Public transport, supposed to wear a mask. Gets to the station or the stop near the school, gets off the bus, train, meets up with their friends, takes the mask off, walks to school, puts the mask on to go back into school, takes the mask off. And, you know, there are real issues here about common sense. Kids are going to be fiddling with their masks all the time. There are some children who get sent to school in filthy, dirty clothes because the washing doesn't get done. Is a filthy mask better than no mask? You know, what sort of mask should people be wearing? Are you going to wear them in corridors? Well, are you going to remember what's going to be the sanction against little Johnny or little Jenny if you've forgotten your mask or you've left it in the previous classroom? It's utter confusion, which is, I'm afraid, the signature imprint of this.
And you know, it's not just a complaint about the government. I mean, this is, as a parent, this is not whinging and whining. I mean, we want to know what's safe for our kids, right? So I know, I think at this point, I'm going to send my two sons to school. They will take a mask. They will wear it in the corridors, but it's not mandatory right now. Is it? I think it's not mandatory, and they will not wear them in the classroom.
No, exactly. And it's, you know, it's advisory. It's obligatory in Scotland, but not mandatory. So, you know, we're getting into the realms of semantics here of what do you do. But it's a little bit like, you know, going into shops. You're not supposed now to go into any shops in England without a mask on. But it's not down to the shopkeepers. You know, these are people, supermarket workers and bus drivers and people like that, who only a few months ago, people were standing outside and clapping and cheering and saying, oh, these are superheroes. Now people seem to think it's okay to abuse them and insult them if they're told to put a mask on.
And there's been a lot of abuse and a lot of that. I mean, as there has been everywhere, there's been problems in Germany and France and elsewhere. But can you just, I mean, as somebody who is an expert on the government here, I think, and the way that they behave, can you tell me why was the UK so different than everybody else in Europe? I mean, when Spain was locking down and France was locking down and Scotland even was getting very strict, just the government of Boris Johnson, Prime Minister Boris Johnson here, just didn't want to move forward. And it almost seems like they took a playbook from Donald Trump in the White House.
Yeah, he did. Boris Johnson's modus operandi is basically, don't worry about it, it'll be fine because I'm such great fun and I've always got a quick joke to crack. And anyway, aren't I the bloke that you'd like to go and have a drink with in a pub or go to the cafe with? And he's got no attention to detail. He doesn't read stuff. He doesn't engage with experts. He's not impressed with experts. And he thought he could sail through. I mean, the only thing I would say, Dana, is if he hadn't had coronavirus himself, we would be in a far worse state, because I think up until then, he was pretty much on Trump's page, as you say, of actually probably not believing that it was any worse than the flu. Now, you know, we remember the Prime Minister was in intensive care for a few days, and there was concern over whether or not he would survive coronavirus. But, you know, we've gone backwards. The messages have been mixed. The government is now trying to blame health agencies. They didn't listen to warnings. They weren't prepared for this.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to.
And as a result, the death toll here is probably almost double of what it is in Spain and France and Germany, and pretty horrendous numbers. Just for people just joining us now, I'm Dana Lewis, based in London. I'm the creator and host of Backstory with Dana Lewis, the podcast. We try and check it out. With me to discuss headlines and news coming out of Europe is Joe Phillips, who comes to us from Kent. And Joe is a well-known commentator. So carrying on with what we were talking about with Boris Johnson. So you have what I termed the perfect storm, because you have COVID-19, which is incredibly tough on any economy in the world right now. And in addition to that, people forget that in the United Kingdom, people voted for Brexit, which is that they want to leave the European Union, and they are going to do so. They have technically left the European Union, and the trade deal, there is an interim period, which we are in now, that expires at the end of this year. And Germany this week, which has the rotating chair in the European Union, said there's no point in having the foreign ministers discuss Brexit because there is no progress and it would be a complete waste of time, which means it sounds like Britons are going to crash out of Europe with no trade deal. What does that happen? I mean, what does that do economically?
Well, what does it do economically? It sends everything crashing through the floor. And don't forget, I mean, the vote to leave was very, very close indeed. It would be very interesting if we had the vote now, because I think a lot of people would have changed their mind. And there were all sorts of arguments about how the referendum was held and whether you should have had a 10% differentiation for it to be binding. No referendum.
It was 48-52, 48% to 52%, and referendum should normally be more than that, but regardless.
Exactly. But, you know, Boris Johnson's predecessor, but one, David Cameron, thought he could sail through, didn't for 1 minute think that it would go against him, and then, you know, walked away, and we know what happened after that. So I think what's happened is that Boris Johnson really, again, it comes back to this thing. He doesn't really care about the details. He wants to be Prime Minister. He wants to deliver Brexit. You know, his phrase to get elected was "get Brexit done." He doesn't actually care, I don't believe, how it is done. He doesn't care if on January the 1st, you know, we are out without any deal, without any trade deal with America or anywhere else. He's done what he said he'll do. He's delivered Brexit.
I mean, it could be an economic disaster, though.
It could be a total economic disaster. I mean, we're hugely dependent on Europe, but it's not.
Joe, somebody just asked their Santa Clarita, who's watching us, just asked, can they ask for an extension due to COVID-19? But it doesn't sound like they're going to ask for an extension. No, they could conceivably do
it. He's always said he wouldn't ask for an extension, but interestingly, Tony Blair, the former Labour Prime Minister, suggested a few weeks ago that there was a way to extend it because of COVID-19, which have obviously taken up an awful lot of the time and concentration of European governments. So Brexit has gone onto the back burner a little bit. But you could use this the next year. In other words, you have another 12 months to do the technical details. But in order to do that,
why don't they want to extend it? Why won't they extend it?
Because he's bored with it. He's bored with it. He wants to be done with it. He wants to get it over and done with, and then he'll walk away, I bet you.
I have a good friend, and she's a very good commentator named Jo Phillips. And she's told me she thinks Boris Johnson's simply going to bail out of the job, that he's going to quit in the new year.
Yeah, I believe it too. And I think it's it's the way he works. He'll walk away before things get ghastly. You know, we know that we're probably going to get a second wave. We know the health service is going to be under huge pressure with winter flu and all of those things. We know the economy is going through the floor, unemployment's going through the roof. He doesn't want to stay and sort out those details. He wants to be a prime minister for the good times. So I think he'll walk away. We'll see. We'll come back in 6 months' time.
Let's move to the Mediterranean and the Adriatic. In case people don't know their geography very well, Turkey and Greece both share those waters. And while in America you have been busy with police brutality issues and demonstrations and your own COVID-19 problems, unlike anybody else on the planet, quite frankly, Turkey and Greece are heading for a showdown, and we risk having a war, a full-out war, that can draw in European countries. The Turkish vessel, the Oruk Reis, has for weeks been carrying out seismic research escorted by Turkish warships. All of that detail doesn't really matter so much as the fact that Turkey is laying claim to certain parts of the Mediterranean, which Greece lays claim to. It is a historic, long-standing disagreement, but now you have European countries like France and Italy that are kind of making this a European versus Turkey showdown, and Germany is in the middle trying to negotiate. And all of these countries are NATO countries. They're supposed to be united. They seem very divided, and they're worried about a shooting war could start in the Mediterranean, Joe.
Yeah, and it comes down to that lovely three-letter word that has caused so much death and chaos around the world: oil. This is about the discovery of oil in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the territorial waters, which Greece, I think, has said they're extending their territorial waters by 12 miles. I don't know that you can
Right,
actually see that.
which is standard in most parts of the world, but
Then,
not
yeah,
when you have islands dotted very close to one another's
exactly.
coasts. In Turkey and
And
Greece, it creates all sorts of problems. And Greece also says that there's a continental shelf, international water rule, and Turkey says there isn't a shelf. And regardless, there are warships now heading towards one another in the Mediterranean.
yeah, and you've got France, Cyprus, and Italy on military maneuvers in that area anyway. Greece and Turkey have not exactly been bosom buddies for years and
No.
years and years. And, you go back to the Ottoman Empire and the Roman Empire and everything else, and they've always been, there's always been tension. But I think, as you rightly say, Dana, it seems as though quite a lot of Europe is
I want to just talk to
ganging Turkey.
Alexei Navalny. Alexei Navalny. He remains in hospital in Germany. Alexei Navalny, for people that don't know, is a Russian opposition figure. There aren't very many of them. None of them get time on television in Russia. But Alexei Navalny has been quite successful at exposing corruption in Russia. Last week, he was on a plane from Omsk. He drank some tea in the airport before boarding, suddenly became very ill. He was rushed to a hospital in Germany after a lot of toing and froing with the family in the Kremlin. They finally let him leave Russia, and they are saying in Germany they believe that there's no question that he was poisoned. The Kremlin right now is saying that they don't want to do any kind of investigation. Why is this, do you think, important in Europe right now, Joe?
Well, because of the tension between Russia and the rest of the world. I mean, we had in this country, we had the poisoning in, the beautiful market cathedral town of Salisbury, of the Skripals. We've had incidences here in this country before, but it's this power and this tyrannical crackdown on any opposition by Putin and his heavies, really, that is very frightening to Russia. And of course, we are all across Europe. We are locked in to Europe. We're locked in to relationships with Russia, whether that's through trade or through energy, through a variety of things. But of course, when we see them behaving like this, and of course they would deny it, wouldn't they? What are we supposed to do? I mean, it's amazing that he was taken to Germany, and one hopes he makes a good recovery.
Yeah, and I mean, let's see what happens. But it's definitely increasing tensions between Europe and Russia again, and the sanctions that were pushed under the Magnitsky Act. Magnitsky is a lawyer who was jailed in Russia and died in prison. The Magnitsky Act has been passed in the United States. It's been passed here in the UK. It's under consideration by the EU, which is a series of sanctions against Russia, and especially people inside President Putin's inner circle. This will heighten the push for an extension of the Magnitsky Act and sanctions against Russia. Very quickly, let's talk about the Black Lives Matter issues in the United States. There's been a shooting this week in Kenosha, Wisconsin. A man was shot a number of times in the back by a policeman. The police say that he may have had a knife. Jacob Blake is alive, but he is paralyzed. And a lot of our American viewers, Joe, don't know that when the George Floyd shooting took place in Minneapolis, not shooting, sorry, a policeman applied a knee to George Floyd in Minneapolis, and he died. When that happened, there was a lot of spillover here. There were a lot of big demonstrations here. A lot of BLM protesters took to the street. There were some white nationalists who went and guarded some of the monuments in Parliament Square. There was some violence between police and protesters and some of the white nationalists. And people are bracing for something similar here again in wake of what's taking place. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I'm not sure, whether they're bracing themselves in the same way, but there is no doubt that the killing of George Floyd reignited the fury and the passion of people, Black Lives Matter and other protesters, who, we've just had a message actually from somebody saying, greetings from the US, where our president is nuts and our police cannot stop shooting people.
I saw
And,
that. Yeah.
and you just sort of think, okay, so this isn't a one-off. It keeps happening time and time again.
Yeah.
And what it does is it inflames, it enrages. And what we saw here in England was people protesting, and it created a conversation, if you like. I mean, it was a tense conversation, but it was a public conversation about history and about Europe and Britain's links with slavery. It was about statues that we have all over this country, erected to people who, made their money from the slave trade, then, found the light and went the other way and became benefactors and philanthropists. But it's had a huge impact, to the point that, there are now conversations about whether or not Rule Britannia, and Land of Hope and Glory should be sung at the last night of the proms, which is, for people who don't know, is the end of a normally 3-month music festival. And it's a very sort of particular, bonkers, eccentric English thing where everybody waves flags and, you either like it or you don't. Well, anyway, it's not happening live this year with an audience. So they're playing the music but not singing the words. But
So they're playing the music but not singing the words.
well, because there won't be the crowd there to sing, and you can't have the people, socially. I'm sure people will be sitting at home singing. But I think, these are important conversations that countries need to have, but they need to have them in a way where people are respectful. You can't just have these conversations against the backdrop of so much anger. But, for the people of Wisconsin, who can blame them for being so utterly appalled at what's gone on?
I'm just looking at the words of Rule Britannia. So when Britain first at heaven's command arose from out of the azure main, this was another charter of the land. It goes on and on. But what's important, the line that seems to offend everybody is Rule Britannia, rule the waves, Britain never will be slaves. So this is a country that participated in the slave trade. And then later on, actually, it sent ships when it turned away from slavery. It sent ships to police the Caribbean, the Africas. The Royal Navy, in fact, stopped other ships that were participating in the slave trade. But it seemed, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, came out here and said, this is wet, to use his term. What does wet mean, Joe, in British speak? And what was he trying to say?
He means it's pathetic. He means it's woke, I think, is what the phrase is. But his view is, it's British bulldog. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you've got coronavirus. It doesn't matter if you offend a few people. We'll all go down to the pub, sink a few pints, and sing jolly rugby songs. I mean, this is the problem, that you've got a man with no empathy and no sensitivity. It's a little.
Well, he's not the only world leader right now that fits into that.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, you only had to see what Donald Trump Jr. said about Wisconsin and the violence and the protests. Compare that with what Joe Biden said, and you can see this is about having empathy. We don't know what it's like. We're white. We have no right to condemn people who are so angry time after time after time, seeing people of their own race and their own color being murdered by police.
Welcome, everybody, if you're just joining us. And we're about to wrap this up because I'm taking more of Joe's time than I originally billed it. But
what it means in the next program.
This is our first News from London broadcast, where we just really wanted to get together and talk about the news in Europe. And we've covered a lot of different topics here. And Jo Phillips, my guest, is a well-known commentator, and we always appreciate her straightforward, straight shooting opinion on all these things. So Jo, thank you very much. And we may do this kind of weekly or bi-weekly. We'll see if you're still talking to me at the end of it. But it's been great to talk to you.
Who else am I going to talk to?
There are many people. You're in big demand. And we're still continuing to work on our podcast, Backstory, and Joe Phillips has participated in some of that. Backstory with Dana Lewis, and we're covering a lot of different topics on Backstory. It's a podcast. You can listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts, and we hope that you just don't listen once, that you subscribe and you share it. And thank you for all the people who have been sending in notes while we've been broadcasting. David Schuster, who's a great host of Quick Hits News, and we participate in that. And Mark Goldman, thanks for joining us from where, I think you're in San Francisco, Mark. So thanks so much for joining us as well. Joe, take care.
Great to talk to you.
Thank you, everybody.